Hi, I'm Bergen Eickhoff, and this is Sunday School Round 2. Today we're going to talk about mimicry in Mark's narration of Jesus' baptism. Let's begin by jumping into the text. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee, and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart, and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, saying, "You are my Son, the Beloved. With you I am well pleased." I know, this isn't actually a Christmas story, but this is the moment that we're introduced to Jesus, and you've probably heard it presented as a beautiful, innocent baptism where Jesus gets a blessing from his dad in the clouds. Maybe you've even had a pastor explain how the word for torn open is only ever used here and when the temple curtain is torn in two after Jesus' crucifixion in Mark. But what if I were to tell you that this text is actually a parody of one of the most important stories in Roman Imperial Theology? That's what we're exploring in today's Sunday school class. Let's go. To begin our imperial critical read of Mark's baptism narrative, we're first going to look at John Dominic Crossan's article, Roman Imperial Theology, from In the Shadow of Empire. That way we can gain a better picture of the theology of empire that Mark would have been responding to. To begin, Crossan explains how Roman imperial theology, more than just an emperor cult, really was the glue that held the empire together. Central to that religion was the belief in the divinity of Julius Caesar and his heirs. This belief was communicated in a multimedia format through plays, civic assemblies, worship of the pantheon of gods, epic poems, poems, and perhaps the most notoriously on the coins that famously depicted Caesar or the current Caesar with words affirming Caesar's divinity and control over Rome. If we look at some of the literature of the time, we see three crucial characteristics forming the theology of Caesar's divinity. First, in the Aeneid, the main character, Aeneas, is promised that one of his descendants will include a Roman named Julius, who shall expand the empire Aeneas has begun over the oceans. This provides Julius Caesar and all his descendants with an ancient lineage that justifies their right to rule and sets them in a long line of heroes given the mandate to conquer the world by the gods. So factor number one, ancient lineage. The second factor is the prophetic promise. Oftentimes, the prophetic promise comes from foreign figures, particularly women, who claim that their people have waited for a Roman hero to restore order and justice to their land. In the Aeneid, the most clear example is Dido of Carthage, who really just needs a big, strong Trojan man to fix all of Carthage's problems, and her problems, for some reason. The reason is racism and sexism. But anyway, reading the Aeneid uncritically makes it sound like people from all over the world are just waiting for Caesar to come and conquer them so that Roman order and peace can be spread over all the world. So ancient lineage and prophetic promise set up Caesar as a hero with a mandate to conquer the world. But the third factor of Roman imperial theology is divinity bestowed by a heavenly promise. This heavenly promise typically came from both a father figure and from one of the gods, and usually followed a great victory. To quote directly from Crossan's article, he cites the poet Propertius in one of his elegies, writing that, "My songs are sung for Caesar's glory. While Caesar is being sung, do even you pray attend Jupiter?" Second, the archer god Apollo, reputedly the actual divine father of Augustus, leaves his natal island of Delos to address Augustus, saying, "O savior of the world, now conquer at sea. The land is already yours, my bow battles for you, and all this load of arrows on my shoulders is on your side." Finally, Augustus's adopted father, Julius Caesar, from the star of Venus, looks marveling on. "I am a god," he says. "This victory is proof that you are of my blood." So we have Augustus's victories earning him the bestowal of divinity both from his heavenly dad and also from his adopted dad, who's also a god too. It's complicated, but basically Augustus wins battles, so he's a god. And the combination of Jupiter, Apollo, and Julius together establish that Augustus is truly the incarnate of the deities on earth. The Roman emperor, through their ability to conquer, is the presence of Jove on earth and the savior of the world. Sounding familiar yet? These three things together, ancient lineage, prophetic promise, and divinities bestowed by heavenly presence through victory, are hallmarks of how the Caesars and their heirs declared that they were the presence of the gods on the earth, and carried a divine mandate to establish peace on the earth through their conquest. According to Crossan, the simplified formula of the Roman Imperial Theology is religion, which leads to war, which leads to victory, which leads to peace. So in short, you had faith in Caesar, so Rome could acquire peace through victory in war. Now let's go back to Jesus' baptism. What's brilliant about Mark is that Jesus just shows up. He doesn't have any ancient lineage. He doesn't have any important parentage. He doesn't have any special powers. He's just some guy. This stands in contrast to what we'll see in Matthew and Luke, in which make clear that Jesus comes from the line of David, and even John emphasizes that Jesus was incarnate with God from the beginning of creation. But in Mark, ancient lineage is noticeably absent. He's just another nobody who wants to get baptized by John the Baptist. So the ancient lineage that's so essential to Roman Imperial Theology is rejected. But John the Baptist does fulfill the role of the prophetic promise. He proclaims that all people must prepare the way for the Messiah's arrival. He draws upon the messianic prophetic tradition to recall God's promise to send a Messiah king who will restore Israel's kingdom to its former glory. But if we look ahead, we see that John is 5 chapters away from being executed by Herod, the representative of Rome in the region. So while Rome's prophetic promise comes from beautiful women in faraway lands, Jesus' prophetic promise comes from some dude in the wilderness wearing camel's hair and eating honey and locusts who's about to be executed as the enemy of the state. But then, after Jesus comes out of the water, the Spirit flies into him, and a voice from the heavens declares, "You are my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Divinity is bestowed on Jesus through a heavenly promise, not because he won a military victory, not because of any miracle that he performed, but because he got baptized. He is the opposite of Caesar. He has no ancient lineage. His prophetic promise just comes from some random outcast prophet who's about to be killed, and he has no accomplishments. And yet, Mark declares that this Jesus is the incarnate of God on earth. It's honestly kind of shocking how well these 3 verses of Mark fulfill the requirements of Roman Imperial Theology for Jesus. And that's because this is an example of mimicry, a technique of imperial resistance literature in which the oppressed imitate or mimic the methods through which the empire justifies their might and right to conquest, to justify their own right and might to rebel against imperial conquest. It's an attempt to decolonize the minds of the oppressed by saying an emphatic no to the empire and reinvigorate an oppressed people of their own worthiness to self-determination and their faith. So through an imperial critical approach, we can read Jesus' baptism in Mark as a rejection of the widely circulated claim of Caesar's divinity. It's a way of saying no to all the Roman religious propaganda and declaring that God works not in power, but through an ordinary, oppressed Israelite. Crossan observes that anyone calling someone who is not Caesar the Son of God in the Roman Empire would either be committing low lampoon or serious treason. It's rejecting the very glue that exists to hold the empire together. And I would suggest that Mark's portrayal of Jesus' incarnation is both parody and treason through the way that he establishes Jesus as a total nobody in contrast to Caesar's grandiose origins. It's a way of rejecting glory, gold, and even gender expectations to claim that Jesus is a more true God on earth than Caesar, in all of his victories, could ever hope to be. However, mimicry and parody are not without their own risks. Stephen Moore inquires whether Mark's conception of authority just replaces Caesar with Jesus. Jesus' authority comes solely from God and not through anything that he does differently from Caesar or the Roman Empire, so even though Jesus might be better, Jesus just replaces one absolute and total authority with his own. Tatsiang Benny Liu agrees, arguing that Mark granting Jesus immediate divine authority duplicates the colonial choice of serve or be destroyed. Because this scene is without any witnesses, Jesus' claim to divine authority is just that God gave it to him. And Jesus' claims later on in the gospel that you either follow him or you follow Satan replicates the imperial binary that separates people between those saved and those anathema to Jesus' empire, the same choice that Rome offers. So even though Jesus is a counter-Caesar, Mark's mimicry leads him to perpetuate an imperial ideology. Others disagree, however, and see elements of difference in Mark's mimicry that reveal how Jesus is fundamentally different from Rome. In Binding the Strong Man, Ched Myers argues that Jesus' counter-empire movement begins with the bestowal of incarnation through a humble baptism that reveals how Jesus' rule is carried out through non-violence, while Rome's love language was pretty much constant violence. Jesus' authority is not to establish a servile relationship, but a way of rejecting the idea that authority can be earned through violence. And if we recall Crossan's explanation that Roman Imperial Theology functions as a process from religion to war to victory to peace, he then claims that Jesus' counter-program to Imperial Theology is religion through nonviolence, which leads to justice, which leads to peace. So peace through justice. Through that approach, Mark's baptism scene might mimic Rome's claim to divine authority, but its parody highlights how it is Jesus' humble origins and commitment to nonviolence and receiving baptism that make him worthy of being declared God incarnate on earth. For only his nonviolence can lead to lasting peace. So which of these is a better way of interpreting the Bible through empire? That's up for you to determine as a growing interpreter of the Bible as a product of imperial occupation. With the interpretive tools that you're learning, it's up to you to figure out whether Mark's use of mimicry successfully defies an imperial ideology of authority or winds up perpetuating it itself. But I'd suggest that you begin by reading this passage on your own, or maybe some other passages in Mark, to examine the role of how God, glory, gold, and gender are used to either promote or reject empire and colonization in this gospel. Because if there's anything that I want these videos to communicate, it's that we grow as people of faith and spirituality when we challenge ourselves to read the Bible in a wide variety of ways. So happy reading, fight the empire through learning, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.